What is up, sexy people? It is Dave, it is Duncan back from Metal Epidemic for another album review. And for this review, Duncan and I have been checking out the new album from Seattle industrial punk trio Haunted Horses. The band's new album, Dweller, will be released on January 10th via 31G Records. Okay, so Haunted Horses is an industrial punk trio hailing from Seattle. The band has a reputation for a relentless and chaotic sound that pushes the boundaries of post-punk and noise rock. Formed by Colin Dawson and Mike Pelly, the band's sonic intensity was further amplified with the addition of bassist Brian McClelland in 2022. Their debut album, Watcher, showcased their ability to craft a visceral, noise-driven experience, earning them accolades from critics such as Anthony Fantano of The Needle Drop. Building on
That's
this,
not his real name, according to almost every video he switches up. We should try something similar.
should we?
Yeah. Fave Kukanen. That's your new name.
Excellent, that's going to catch on. Building on this momentum, their follow-up, Dead Meat, and their 2022 release, The Worst Has Finally Happened, continued to explore dark and experimental themes, solidifying their reputation in the industrial rock scene. These albums were noted for their complex soundscapes and thematic depth. With Dweller set to expand their exploration of existential dread and transformation, Haunted Horses is poised to further evolve their sound. The album is a spiritual successor to their previous work, delving into intense, unsettling themes with renewed vigour, the fear and anxiety tied to the obliteration of one's self or identity, and the unknown outcome of this dissolution. The concept came through a series of meditations, some of which didn't make sense until the process was complete. Known for their captivating live performances and extensive touring history, Haunted Horses continues to captivate audiences and challenge the conventions of their genre with this release. Dweller was recorded and mixed by Robert Cheek at XX Studios, mastered by Eric Broyhill. It'll be available digitally as well as on limited edition colour vinyl.
Oh, that's Dave right there.
Shawings. So, Haunted Horses.
The least swing band ever, but I'm glad that you threw a swing in there.
Another band that have like a back catalogue of albums and I've never heard of them before. Like, what the fuck?
In fairness, they are swimming in a genre that we don't necessarily spend a whole amount of time in.
True.
Mostly because the word industrial was in there and you're like fucking have an allergic reaction. We need to get like an EpiPen for you every time we do a review of like any fucking industrial sounding things we can fucking stab you and bring you back to life, Pulp Fiction style.
That's an anti-swing. But
man, I had an anti-swing. He died at 73. Made a mean casserole, I'll tell you that.
But there is a link here. There is a link to a band we've reviewed in the past, Duncan, and interviewed in Glasgow. So, the newest member of Haunted Horses,
Yep.
Bassist Brian McClelland, who joined in 2022, is actually also the guitarist of another Seattle band called Filth is Eternal.
Ah, right. So we interviewed the front woman, we didn't interview him.
Not him, no. We interviewed Lisa
Yes.
From the band when they were in Glasgow last time. So there's a bit of linkage here, a little bit of linkage. However, Haunted Horses, completely new, never heard of them before. Hadn't had any material before, so was going in blind. What did you think? What did you make of? I'm going to come to you first because you're the industrial guy. What did you think of Dweller?
So, once again, Dave has sprung upon me something with no context. Well, and that's not true. He did supply a folder which had all the press and the PR statements, and I was like that. Get the fuck. Just give me the music, because that's how I roll. I roll on the basis of purely going in blind, and let's just see how this entertains me. Interestingly enough, from the name, I had a vague-ish
All right. Okay.
feeling of what it was going to sound like. Haunted Horses, weirdly, vocally and synth-wise, was very much where I thought it was going to sit.
Okay.
The rest of the band, not so much.
Okay.
So, I think this is a really interesting album, which in a lot of respects has quite a lot from my perspective that kind of like excites me. There's a few things in here that I'm going to mark it down for as well, but we are going to get to that
Right.
once I spoke about all the positive things, of which there is no shortage here.
Okay.
The one thing I like about this is, like, it's they kind of touched on it in that kind of press statement there about like that the sound that they have. There is a fullness in their sound, like, very reminiscent, like industrial at its core. The best industrial at its core manages to use space creatively, like in your headphones. Now that can be weird sounds, it could be like obnoxious sounds, it could be just in general having like a drone that just manages to encapsulate and fill things out. And Haunted Horses like actually spend a lot of time making sure, I'm sure it's been done through the production as well, that what you get through your headphones has this kind of full cascading vibe. You're very much enveloped by the sound. And that is both the abrasive side of the band as well, and the more kind of catchier elements. Although the catchier elements, when I say catchy, I'm talking like Joy Division catchy, you know what I mean? Where it's like, you can sing it, but you're also depressed as fuck while you're singing it.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the fullness of the sound that you have.
Yep.
The production is fucking awesome on this one. So it's big, thick, live drums, like big, like super, like punchy, crunchy, huge sounding drums. Underneath that, you have this kind of cascade of at times synthetic bass and real bass, which has a kind of almost, it's like pushed to the edge with like a distortion on it. It sounds fucking, once again, huge. You have some guitar work, you have a lot of synth work, a lot of sound design, and then over the top you have this kind of very brooding, crooning, kind of 80s new wave punk, somber sort of Joy Division is the best way to describe it, esque sort of style vocals. Reminded me a little bit, we reviewed that album by Throat.
I was going to mention them in this actually.
Yeah, like it reminded me a lot of that and the way it was vocally delivered.
Yep.
The difference is Throat, for all their very pessimistic press that they had, it was like, this is the last album of the world or whatever it was. Like, we're all gonna die, we're fucking dead. Like, might as well have just written that in the press statement. Their album was weirdly optimistic. Haunted Horses not so much. Like, it sticks in a very somber, very, very dark zone. And to be honest, I'm cool with that. Like, if that's the lane you're picking, give me it. The last thing I want is then at the end where, hello my honey, hello my dark. Like, I don't want to have like jazz hands at the end. I just want it fucking to remain that way. That's what you get here with Dweller. Dweller has a very particular finger on the pulse of a kind of more kind of pessimistic view on everything they're singing about. I love the vocals on this one because they do remind me of a shitload of stuff that I listened to as a kid and stuff that I gravitate to as an adult when I'm like that. I will listen to stuff from my youth. But they're a smart band as well. Like, post-punk is what they're, like industrial post-punk or like industrial punk or whatever they're calling themselves. They probably sit, from this album anyway, not knowing their back catalogue, more comfortably in the industrial side than maybe anything else. It's industrial at its core. The drums, the bass work, and specifically the synth work all exist in there. Any guitar work or any vocals maybe exist in a kind of post-punk world, but it's not the driving force of what they're doing. That abrasiveness that they have is definitely on the industrial side. But they're a band that weaves in turns. So, like, it kicks off with, and I felt this was a concept album without knowing the details. The only reason I feel that is there's at least 2 songs that refer to a character as Dweller, i.e. someone that occupies. So we have Dweller on the Threshold and Dweller in the Abyss. Dweller in the Abyss weirdly appears at the exact halfway mark, signifying the second half of a, I don't know, limited edition colour vinyl.
I like it.
If such a thing existed, but that's what you would do. Like, Temple of Bone would be your close of your first half, Dweller in the Abyss would be the start of your second half, which to me feels like the closing of one chapter, the opening of another. And it kind of weirdly plays that way as well. The back half of the album has a more experimental streak in it. Well, you get through Dweller in the Abyss, which kind of feels like a continuation of a lot of the themes you've had before, but by the time you've through Destroy Each Other and into Seed, and Seed is just like this bizarre, very abrasive, kind of fucking hitting you with lots of different sounds and symbols and shit like that sort of track. It then kind of smooths out for Watchtower and Feathered Water. So I kind of feel like, once again, this album has been designed in two halves and then brought together, which I am not against. Well, you listen to Watchtower could have been written by Nine Inch Nails with that like big old bada 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 sort of bass thing. It's like very, very, very hooky, even though their music is not necessarily all that hooky. What you get on the listening experience is not necessarily a long album. This is about the 35-minute mark, but you get a kind of a variation on a theme. They never stray that far from the core sound, but what they are doing is adding and we'll try this with a little bit of this, we'll try this with a little bit of that. And that's where I kind of swing in with maybe the negative aspect here. Okay. There isn't a huge amount of change in tempo on this album. You could say that with a lot of industrial music in general, but it does fit very much in that mechanical, like piston-like drum time signature that just kind of works its way through. Just realised that makes me look like I'm wanking, which I'm not, obviously. But like it does kind of follow a relatively monotonous tone.
It'd be a really miserable wank if you were doing it to this album.
I wouldn't be able to finish.
No.
There'd be no climax for me.
No.
This is what they call slow engine pace. You know what I mean? Like when you've committed to a night of wanking, you know what I mean? And you know you only have one in you because you're getting a bit older. As a teenager, you could probably do 3 or 4, but nowadays, who's the time, Dave?
Who has the time?
Who has the time? I'm just going to do it slow for an hour. And no one's going to enjoy it, especially me. But like in the case of this one, like it just follows a fairly monotonous pace. Now, with that and the backbone of the overall sound, at times tracks do tend to, it's not necessarily bleed into each other, but there isn't enough distinctiveness in the overall sounds to break them up. So you can at times be like, this sounds like about 8 minutes or something like that. No, you probably went through into the next one, and not necessarily, unless you're paying attention, not realised it. The other thing I would say as well is, as much as I kind of like the committing to the kind of darker tempos, I think at times it is okay to like experiment, maybe more even in the instrumentation if vocally you can or don't want to do it, with something that has a bit more light in it. And I kind of felt like this almost forgoed that in a way which felt overtly deliberate. Like I felt at times, right, this feels like it could be moving towards a major chord, and then the band like pulled back from it hard. And as a result of that, I got to the end of it and I just kind of felt that I enjoyed what I listened to, but at the same time I wasn't like hitting play straight away again. Right. We mentioned Throat there, we'll come back to them again. The reason I spun to death that Throat album was as pessimistic and as dark and brooding, as fucking goth laden as it was, there was 1 or 2 moments where I kind of felt like the clouds just parted enough that a ray of sunlight came through before everything went dark again. This album kind of almost cries out for that and doesn't get it. Now, that might not be Haunted Horse's bag, and that is fine. But to me, on this album, there were 1 or 2 moments where I felt like just an injection of something like that would make certain tracks stand out a little bit more than they did. That being said, in terms of overall craft, The songs are very well put together. They have a sound which is not like completely unique, but at the same time, I can't think of a band that sounds exactly like this without saying it's a bit of this, a pinch of this, and a pinch of this. So they have that in there. I think the production on this is fucking great. It's another one that just sounds like it's been crafted to their sound overall. And vocally, I love the vocals on this. I really do kind of feel. I've been listening to a lot of that kind of easy 80s inspired. I'm like in the middle of making my best albums at the end of the year, so I'm going back through and listening to a lot of them. There are a lot of bands that are kind of using this as a kind of vocal technique or style for the end, and it works. It really works for their sound. There's a reason that industrial really found its groove in the late 80s, and that's because there was a lot of vocalists that were like, yeah, I just don't want to have to deal with a guitarist right now. I just want to play on my synthesizer and still do the vocals that I do. So yeah, it's maybe not as it's not the album I would have done if I was in the band, right?
Right.
But that being said, all the gripes I have with this are purely personal ones and not technical ones. So I don't think they're in the wrong direction. I don't think they're doing anything wrong per se. It's just if I was crafting an album of this magnitude for this length, I would be inclined to have one or two tracks with something that made them like starkly different, as opposed to maybe one or two tracks with like the closing track, Feather Water, for example, injects a bit of pace. Had a track like that been earlier in the album, it would have stood out a little bit more as opposed to being the end song. It's that sort of thing. It's maybe compositionally and structurally, as opposed to anything in the music itself overall.
Okay.
Now, you are not an industrial fan. This leans
really.
heavy on the industrial, but you are a punk fan and you are a post-punk fan as well. So I imagine that even if you weren't into the old industrial side of this, there are still things in this that you will have enjoyed. So I am interested to hear your opinion.
You tell what else I like, Duncan? Misery.
You do like Misery. You are the company to Misery. See, when they say Misery loves company, what they mean is Misery loves Dave.
Yeah. I love stuff that's miserable. And this might just be the exact streak of misery I was looking for this week. I as I said, I didn't know anything about the band, so I was kind of like, how have they got all these albums? I never heard of them. So I did a wee bit of digging, went back and I checked out I think it was 3 albums I listened to. And to be honest, their sound hasn't like drastically changed over those albums. They've just kind of like tweaked certain parts and refined it over time. But still like showing little advancements in their songwriting at the same time. The previous album, The Worst Has Finally Happened, definitely showed the most in terms of growth, where you could really hear them start to find their sound and feel comfortable in it. So I can totally see why they've said that this album is like a kind of spiritual successor to what they've done prior, because there is elements and ideas that have kind of continued on into Dweller. However, Dweller, having listened to the previous 3 albums, Dweller is much darker. And the previous album was pretty dark. But from the outset, this just takes you into a kind of bleak territory. It's droning. It's like almost kind of, the first track felt almost kind of like Doom-like in its nature of heaviness. But with this like industrial kind of movement to it rhythmically.
I mean, industrial, once again, like, not that we keep coming back to Doom being the source code to like about a million different genres. I get that, like, old school industrial was never necessarily all that quick.
Yeah.
And tracks ran long, and they were like, it was essentially hammering the motif, the hook, the riff, or whatever it was, over and over and over again, which is kind of what becomes almost semi-hypnotic, which is kind of what Doom does. So.
Yeah, for sure. And it's layered up with some really dank sounds. Like, this is the sounds on this are equally as eerie as they are disturbing. And then as I moved into track 2, which was The Spell, I was like, something kind of clicked and something hit me, and I was like, wait a minute, that instrument that I think is a guitar is not a guitar, that is a bass.
Yeah.
And I was like,
It's a
hold
thick
on.
bass.
Hold on a second, let's just have a wee bit more research here. So I like kind of dug into the press release, mentioned nothing about a guitar. It's like, right, okay, maybe there's no guitar. And then I was like, let's have a look at some live videos. So I jumped onto YouTube, checked out some of their live stuff in the last kind of 6 months. No guitar. So there's a...
That's interesting, because so is that a synthesizer? That synthesizer? Is that a synthesizer doing
So the
certain
vocalist
things, or is that the
has
bass?
the vocalist has machines for all the kind of weird fucking
Cool.
dark shit, and then you've got the bassist who's also the guitarist in Velvet
Yeah.
Eternal, and the drummer. But there's no guitars on stage for in the last kind of 6 months anyway. If you go
Yeah.
back further, I think there might have been guitars on the earlier albums, but I don't think there's any guitar on this release. But they're kind of using the bass in an almost kind of guitar type way on this album, and it kind of it does give this kind of additional layer of heaviness to the sound, the way they're kind of using it here. And some of these tracks are pretty heavy, like Grey Eminence almost had like a kind of Doodseskader type kind of abrasiveness to it, but with this like more post-punk vocal over the top. And then track 4, which is called Fucking Hell, lives up to its name really, which is...
It is, yeah. There's
like
there's a scene in Hellraiser 2. You
Yeah.
cast your memory back to the magnificent Oscar-winning Hellraiser 2. Won the Oscars. And there's a scene where like they go into Leviathan, which is basically the fucking purgatory. It's where the Cenobites come from. And Frank, the evil character from the first movie, is in his own personal... He's actually got written in blood, "Help me, I'm in hell," written on like tiles and stuff like that. But he is skinless, just kind of lying on this cold fucking marbled floor. And that's kind of what that song sounds like, Dave.
Yeah, weirdly, you mentioned horror movies. I was just about to say, like, a lot of this reminds me of that. It's very nightmarish, especially that track is like a kind of punk-infused industrial nightmare. But as much as this album is quite consuming and dark and brooding, I did get there was small moments on this for me where they did feel like they kind of like cracked a window and just like a little bit of air in.
Dave, there's next to no... Like, if I'm struggling for breath, right?
Well, I
there
felt
ain't
like
no air coming in here.
Temple of Bone for me, I think, was the track where they do go into a more atmospheric side. They add in a lot more synths. There's a lot of kind of weird kind of soundscapes going on, and it is perfectly placed in that kind of middle of the album. Kind of this is not a breather track, but it does have that same kind of idea where there's a bit more atmosphere on it than the rest of the tracks on here. Dweller on the Threshold, though, could be one of my favorite moments on the album. It's much more direct. It's a kind of noise rock meets post-punk type track. It's a very old school kind of punk type rhythm to it, and vocal delivery, and the bass kind of just drives that track forward the whole time. What I thought was amazing though was what you would class as the chorus is almost like an anti-chorus. It's like the anti-swing, all right? It's
I had an anti-chorus who sadly passed away at 77. She did not make a mean casserole.
No. It's in the same place that you'd expect a chorus to be, and the track does kind of lighten in style, but instead of it being like a like uplifting moment, the chords they use go even more into the kind of minor side, and although the vocals are like melodic, they just sound really unsettling. It's like that track in particular, it sounded like he's got this like natural pitch shifter in his voice. It's so weird, but kind of captivating at the time. I thought that track was brilliant. I also think that the choice of like synths and background textures they've got and used on this album are fucking perfect. It's so ominous and so miserable, which I love. And it really just drags these tracks into the gutter, but in a really good way. I think without that extra layer of kind of terror, the album would lose, I think, a bit of its cohesion, and I think it would change. Like the mood would be totally different on this album without that. As I said, it's like an industrial horror movie at times, which which kind of, it makes a lot of sense, because if you watch, like I watched a bunch of their live footage, they are an extremely visual band. This is
See, that's what I'm like. You're swinging me here.
this is about what's going on, just as much as what's going on visually as they are about like the music. And live, they've got all sorts of visuals, like fucked up stuff going on. They got a big screen in the background, and there's loads of weird shit playing. The vocalist, Colin Dawson, who does the synths and all the kind of weird noises, he is like insanely active as a frontman. He spends most of his time like off stage in the crowd, just like throwing himself around, but still like delivering these really kind of harrowing vocals. They put on like a proper show. So like I'd love to see it. I hope they bring it to Scotland one day. That would be awesome to see.
Yeah, 100%.
But I think when I saw that, it just kind of made so much more sense. The music and the visual thing just kind of went, right, okay, I see exactly where this is coming from, and you know what it's kind of connecting to. I really like this. I think yes, it is miserable. It's not an everyday album. I definitely would need to be in a specific mood or headspace for it, but I think it's really cool. I really like their sound, and it's like you said, like you can hear little things, little pinches of other bands, but very difficult to say, oh, they sound like this band.
Oh yeah, they're not. This album reminds me of this album. It's it's more like a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I enjoyed it way more than I thought it was. For an album that's so miserable, I enjoyed it way more than I thought I would. What we're thinking scores wise, what would you score this album from Haunted Horses?
So I'm coming in at a 4. Like I say, there's like, this is my wheelhouse, but I think there's a couple of things I personally would do differently,
Right.
which unfortunately has coloured my opinion of it. But like musically, I can't really pick it apart.
Yeah.
And the sound is really, really cool, and they are essentially, for all intents and purposes, a brand new band for me. So that's where I'm landing. And what about yourself?
I'm a 4 as well. I thought it was really cool. I really dug it. As I said, not like an everyday album, because it can be quite demanding, but I think it's very well done. And if you like music that's fucked up and nightmarish, then Haunted Horses is the band you need to check out right now. So that one drops on January 10th. The album's called Dweller, out on 31G. Links below to the band, their Bandcamp, one of the singles that you can check out, have a listen, see what you think. Happy to hear your thoughts and opinions on it. That is a review. Thanks for checking it out. Much appreciated. We'll be back with another review very soon, but until then, take care. Speak to you soon.
Bye, everyone.